got me a coffee cup about this big. I don't even drink coffee, but it said on it, "World's Greatest Dad." She was 8 months old at the time. But I am convinced that it was her and not my wife who had the cognitive thought that my dad is the greatest, and then bought the cup with all her money that she has. It's easy to find merchandise that says things like that at this time of year. Online, I found a few t-shirts, real t-shirts that you could buy. One of them said, "Some superheroes don't need capes. They're called dads." There's another one that had 2 thumbs on it, and it said, "This is what an awesome dad looks like." And then there was another one that said, "Dad, the man, the myth, the legend." For the humble, down-to-earth types of dads, you know. But it's harder, for some strange reason, to find stuff that says, "World's worst dad." And you just can't find it anywhere. Now, as John has pointed out in the bulletin, you would be led to believe that I'm nominating myself for that title. I'm not, and I'm not nominating any of you either. But I do think that there are some leading candidates for that title, and I think we can actually find them in the Bible. I'm talking about a group of people known as the patriarchs, and I'm talking particularly this morning of a guy named Jacob. Now, here at Trinity, we actually have 3 services every morning. And probably the least known of these is the contemporary service in the gym. And there, for the past month, we've been exploring the life of Jacob. And last week, I thought I had wrapped it up, tied up all the loose ends, resolved all the storylines. But it turns out, Jacob's like a successful Hollywood movie that just can't leave well enough alone. He's got to come back for more. There's a sequel. And I realized there was a lot more we could say about Jacob, particularly about Jacob as a father. Now, Jacob grew up the youngest of twin brothers. His older brother, a guy named Esau, was a rugged, hairy man, apparently even from birth. I don't want to think about that too much. But Esau was a hairy man, and he loved the outdoors. He loved hunting. He was what you would call a macho kind of man. And Jacob was not. Jacob was a homebody. He liked staying at home. He liked cooking. He liked sewing, doing those kinds of things. And in Genesis 25, we read just about the most blatant statement of parental favoritism that you could find. We read that their father Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah, their mother, loved Jacob. Jacob was a mama's boy, and he couldn't get his daddy's love. And we don't know why exactly, but apparently in this family it was very clear who Dad's favorite kid was. And the book of Genesis doesn't delve into the psychological state of Jacob, but I would imagine that it wasn't a real great experience for him growing up. I would imagine that Jacob had what some have called a father wound. A deep ache in the heart because what should have been there, the unconditional love of a father, was not. Now, people with that kind of father wound try to deal with it in all kinds of ways. And the way Jacob dealt with it is not uncommon. He looked to fill that hole with romantic love. So one day he was on the run from his brother Esau, who wanted to kill him. That's a different story. And he's standing by the well, and he sees a woman who he thinks is the most beautiful woman in the world, a woman named Rachel. And he knew right away that he had to marry her. This woman had to be his wife. And I think that Jacob thought to himself, she can fix me. She can heal my insecurities. She can fill that hole in my heart. And this is also a crazy story, but to make a long story short, Jacob worked for 14 years without pay. He essentially made himself a slave to Rachel's father Laban in order to marry Rachel. He worked for 14 years to become Mr. Rachel. That's how deep that wound was in his heart and how badly he wanted to address it. Years down the road, Jacob had fathered quite a few children, 12 sons in all. And if you didn't know how the story went, I wonder what kind of dad you would think Jacob would be. Having experienced everything he did in childhood and adolescence, and now being an adult with kids of his own, how would he treat them? Would he do the same thing his dad did? Would he play his kids off of one another? Would he show favoritism? Or would he recognize the hurt that had caused him and do things differently? This past week, I came across an article in the Huffington Post, which is kind of an American-based news website. And this writer had written a letter to his father, who had passed away a while back, but a father who hadn't spoken to him in the last 20 years of his life. And the ending of this letter especially caught me, and that's what I want to read for you. This is what he says. Dad, my own daughter is due to be born weeks from now, and I swear, if I ever get to a point in my life where she will be forced to wonder why her father won't call her, I will remind myself of the space you carved inside my heart, and then fill that space with an unconditional love you should have instilled inside your son. I resented the man you became, Dad. I truly resent you, even to this day. But I will use your failures as a way of guiding myself through fatherhood. Consider it your contribution to my life, years after you had given up on me, that I will never end up alone and away from the people I love. And you hear the heartache there, right? Not many of us have had dads like that. Many of us have had great, great dads. But this is a reality in the world that we live in. And some people walk around with this space carved inside their hearts. And I think Jacob could have said that. So the question again is, how would Jacob respond? Would he respond like this man who's motivated to undo the wrongs that his father had committed to him? Or would he be different than that? Enough suspense. Let's actually read the text. So Genesis 37 verses 1 to 11 is where we read about Jacob the father. And the words will be on the screen as well. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. And this is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. That would be Joseph. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brother said to him, Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him, and he said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. any suspense about what kind of father Jacob would be was broken pretty quickly. In verse 3, we read that Israel, which was a name that God had given to Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of the other sons. And the reason the text gives for that is that Joseph was born to Jacob in his old age. He was the baby of the family. And this is understandable. If you grew up in a family with multiple siblings, you might have experienced this. I know that my younger brother got away with anything. He lived with a totally different set of rules than I did. It wasn't fair. He got to watch TV shows that I could never have watched. Maybe that was a good thing. But in any case, the baby of the family often kind of is the favorite in some ways. At least that's what it seems like to the older siblings. But the way this family dynamic was played out in their family is interesting. First of all, we read in verse 2 that Jacob brought a bad report about his brothers to his father. Joseph brought a bad report about his brothers to his father Jacob. Now there's a word for this. We call it a tattletale. Or to use a more current English slang word, Joseph was a snitch. Joseph was a guy who saw people doing something and he wanted to tell on them. And so he came to his father and he gave them this bad report. And usually a good father would discern what is being told to him. A good father will investigate what he's hearing. But the text gives every indication that Jacob heard this and he took it as the truth. And his view of Joseph was elevated, and his view of Joseph's brothers decreased as a result. And I can't imagine what it would have been like to grow up in that kind of situation where your father always took the side of your younger, bratty brother. But that wasn't the only way that Jacob showed favorites. The gifts that he gave also were a symbol of it. So he sewed Joseph this long, ornate cloak. Yeah. Okay.
He's passed out up on the balcony.
Okay.
Is there a doctor? Can you ask?
Yeah, is there anyone who can offer medical help? There's somebody.
I think they're
Still, if there's anyone who can offer medical help, maybe head up to the balcony. Thank you. No, that's okay. Are we okay? Up there? We've got some doctors up there. This is good to have a church where there are professionals like that. Okay, well, I think we'll keep on going, but even as you're listening, please be praying for them. Where was I? The cloak. The long, ornate cloak that Jacob had made for his son. But his other brothers didn't get that. And so every day that Joseph would have put on that cloak, and knowing Joseph, he probably would have wore it almost every day. Hey, brothers, good morning. Feeling cold today. I'm glad I got this cloak here. That would have been Joseph. And every day would have been a stabbing reminder to his brothers that his dad loved him more than anybody else. And again, it's easy to put yourself into their shoes. Imagine if you were a kid in Vancouver growing up, and at Christmas, your youngest sibling opened up their present, and it was a game-worn, autographed Henrik Sedin Vancouver Canucks jersey, worth thousands of dollars, and you're sitting there thinking, oh man, my parents are really going all out this year. Like, they are breaking the bank. This is great. I wonder what I'm going to get. Maybe keys to a new car, maybe a big screen TV. And you open up your presents, and it's a package of socks from Costco. And they weren't even worn by Henrik Sedin before they were given to you. What a ripoff. I mean, every day your brother wore that jersey, it would just be this like knife in the heart. Oh, that's right. I am not loved in the same way that my sibling is. That was reality for Joseph's brothers, and they hated him for it. But it wasn't all Joseph's fault, was it? Because Joseph, in a way, was a victim of this as well. Joseph grew up soaking in this praise, this adoration from his father, and he seems to have become pretty entitled. So Joseph's ability to interpret dreams is famous, but he also dreamed his own dreams, and you heard that before. He had a dream, and the text doesn't say it was given by God. It might have, it might not have, but he had a dream where he saw the sun and the moon representing his father and mother, and 11 stars representing his brothers, all bowing down to him. And Joseph loved it. Today, he would have tweeted it. He would have been like, look what I dreamed. But in that day, he just told his family, guys, you won't believe it. You're all going to bow down to me. I'm better than you. This just confirms all along what we thought anyway. And his brothers hated him even more. Jacob at this point rebukes Joseph. He says to him, what are you talking about? This has gone too far. But you know what? It was too little, too late. And what happened next really proves that. His brothers one day out in the field took Joseph, and they said, you know what? That's it. We've had it. We've had it with our dad who loves Joseph more than anybody else. And they sold him into slavery. They sold their own brother into slavery. And then they took that cloak, that symbol of their father's preferential love, they ripped it and they dipped it in blood, and then they gave it to their dad and they said, Dad, he's gone. He's dead. Your son who you loved so much was killed by a wild animal, and that's it for him. We've shown some sympathy for Joseph and for his brothers, but here we can empathize with Jacob, this candidate for the world's worst dad. Because despite of all he's done, just imagine the sense of loss, the pain in his heart. Not only has Rachel recently passed away, but now this son, the son of Rachel, who he loved so much, is also gone. And at the end of chapter 35, Jacob says, I will not be comforted. I will not stop mourning until I join Joseph in the grave. What an encouraging story, hey? This is what you came to church for on Father's Day, right? To hear inspiring stories of great fathers. When I read a story like this, I think, what are we supposed to do with this? What do we take from it? I actually think there are four suggestions that we can make about where we go from this. The first is that the father wound is a real thing. We see it in Jacob's life, that he was created to be loved unconditionally, but he wasn't, and the ramifications were big. And I think biblically speaking, all of us are created with that need. All of us are created with this space inside of our hearts that is designed to be filled by the unconditional love of our father and our mother. But we live in this world that is twisted, that is corrupted, that is sinful. And so no matter how great a father you are, or no matter how great a father you had, and for that matter, no matter how great a mother you are or had, there will be a wound in your heart, because nobody is able to love you perfectly the way you need to be loved. No parent is able to do that. And so what we see throughout Scripture is that all of us carry that wound in our heart, whether it's a small scratch or it's a big gaping hole. That is a reality for us, and all of us need God's grace and healing. The second thing I see is that just as the father wound is real, so is generational sin. You know, you look at Jacob. He experienced what it was like for his father to love one kid more than the other. And then he goes on and becomes a father, and he does the exact same thing. And you think, why didn't he learn? But it's not the only story in the patriarchs like that. Abraham, Jacob's grandfather, once was in a place where there were some powerful men. And Abraham feared that they would want to take his wife, a beautiful woman named Sarah. And so Abraham had just a wonderful idea. He would lie and say that his wife was actually his sister. it didn't actually work out that well, believe it or not. And years later, Isaac, his son, was also in a place where there were some powerful men who he was afraid would want to take his beautiful wife, Rebekah. And you'll never guess what Isaac did. He had a great idea. He would lie about his wife and say that she was his sister. And it didn't work out well again. Why do we do this? Did you know that kids of abusers, kids who have been abused, 1/3 of them go on to become abusers themselves. They become abusive fathers and mothers. Do you know that the kids of alcoholics are 4 times as likely to become alcoholics themselves? I mean, why do we do this? We experience what it's like to suffer in this way, and then we go on and inflict the same thing on other people. That's sin. That's generational sin. We learn from our parents lots of good things, but also some bad things. And that's not to say that we're fated, that we're destined to repeat the mistakes of our parents, but it does mean that these are places where we are vulnerable. Places where we especially need to guard against, where we need to pray into, where we need to seek God's grace and healing. Third thing I think we can take from this is that no father wound and no generational sin is beyond the scope of God's redemptive grace. You look at Joseph's life. Joseph is sold into slavery and then relocated to Egypt. While in prison in Egypt, he interprets a dream of Pharaoh that predicts a 7-year famine. And he becomes Pharaoh's right-hand man. He provides food for the whole ancient Near East. People come to him. Their lives are being saved because he knew what was going to happen. His own brothers come to him, and they don't know it's him. They beg him for food, and when they find out who he is, they fear for their lives. But I love what Joseph says in Genesis 50. This is kind of the theme verse maybe of all of Genesis, and it's one of these verses that ties a lot of narratives and themes in Scripture together. Joseph says to them, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." God can do that. He can take the brokenness, the pain in our lives, and he can do something good with it, make it beautiful. He can work healing in our lives. That's what he does. That's what he wants to do. I love this song by a worship band called All Sons and Daughters. The song's called Brokenness Aside. I'm not going to sing it, don't worry. But it goes, I am a sinner. If it's not one thing, it's another. I'm caught up in words, tangled in lies. But you are a Savior, and you take brokenness aside, and you make it beautiful. Beautiful. That's what God does. He takes that brokenness in our lives, and he makes it into something beautiful. He redeems it. He is able to do that. And the fourth thing I'd want to say from this is that God is able to do that because he is truly the Father. The Bible speaks often of God as a father. And some people have trouble with this because of that father wound that they may carry. Some of you have probably read The Shack before, right? Maybe. The Shack was this book that came out 10 years ago. It just blew up into this huge bestseller. It was crazy. And the character in the book is a guy named Mac. And we learned that Mac had a father who was an elder in a church, but was also an alcoholic and an abusive one. And so later on in the book, when Mac encounters the Trinitarian God, God the Father comes to him as a mother, as a woman. I appreciated a lot about this book. I did. But I don't think healing comes to us when we purge God of fatherly references. I think healing will come when we recognize that true fatherhood gets its content and meaning from who God is as Father. The Bible talks about God as having motherly characteristics, but never talks about him as mother. It talks about him as Father. And that means that for me, as a father, I look to God to get my cues as to who I am to be. I think about Deuteronomy 1, where Moses says that God carried the Israelites through the desert just like a father carries his son. I think about Proverbs 3, where we read that God disciplines those he loves just as a father disciplines the children that he loves. I think about 1 John 3, where we read how great the love that our Father has lavished on us, that we should become children of God, and that is what we are. See how great the love that the Father has lavished on us. And that perfect fatherly love is represented most clearly in Jesus. Jesus, the Son of God, who bore our wounds, our pains, our aches on himself. He identified with us in our humanity so that we could identify with him, so that we could share in his new life, so that we could be healed. Jesus, who on the cross experienced alienation from his Father. He cried out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He was alienated from his Father for a little while so that we, along with him, could be reconciled to him forever. In Jesus Christ, you and I can become children of God. We can be reconciled to a Father who loves us completely and perfectly in the way that we were created to be loved. In Jesus, you truly have a Father. And I want to say this morning, and if some of you here do not know God as Father, and you sense that there's an ache and a pain in your heart, that you long for that kind of love, I want to invite you to find that in God, to turn to him, to talk to him about this. He's calling out to you. He wants you to be his child. And if you'd like to talk about that with somebody after the service, there will be prayer partners here at the front. We'd love to help you connect with your Father in heaven. But right now, before we sing our song of response, we're going to enter into a time of prayer. We're going to pray for our fathers of all kinds, great fathers who have perhaps let us down, people who were not biological fathers but acted like fathers to us. So I'm going to invite Emmy to come. She's going to kind of lead us in this, and we're going to ask the woman to pray. I think every male here will fit into this prayer at some point. So here's what we'll do.